Hello and welcome to the Eating Disorder Therapist podcast. I'm Harriet Frew, eating disorder therapist, here to support you in overcoming disordered eating and finding peace with food. So thank you so much for listening today. Now today I want to talk about body image and some of the critical experiences that can be very influential in the development of body image. And this has been inspired by this week, several of my clients are on a weight restoration journey and they are really struggling. They're really struggling because maybe the scale is going up, and actually as the scale goes up, this brings intense feelings of distress, fear, panic, feel really, really unsafe. And when we've really explored this more, for many of my clients, what is happening is they are associating weight restoration with a time in their life when maybe they were in a different size body, but a time in their life where they felt really, really bad with their self-worth. Maybe they were struggling with depression, low mood, anxiety, maybe they were being bullied, maybe they were living at home, circumstances were really, really stressful. Maybe it was a time where they just felt really disempowered and their level of self-loathing was incredibly high. Now, I guess often all the kind of other things that are going on in life are the kind of real core reason at these points in time that the person is not feeling good about themselves, because of the relationship, the family situation, the bullying, the distress, the bereavement, whatever it is. But this has coincided with being in a body that they deeply disliked and deeply felt uncomfortable in. And this body that they may be thinking back to could be any size body. It's not really about the size of the body. It's not about the number on the scales. It's about the feelings associated with that point in time. So then what is happening is, and as they are on this weight restoration journey, it is bringing up all of these emotions from the past, all of these emotions that are very much associated with that really difficult time. And of course, the client is then feeling like distressed, low in mood, anxious, overwhelmed, really, really fearful, self-disgusted maybe. All these feelings are incredibly intense. And these feelings from the past are being evoked in the present moment as the scale goes up. So I guess what is so helpful is just beginning to have a zoom out on the situation, to have a different relationship and awareness about what is going on sometimes for us when we have a lot of thoughts around weight change, about negative body image, because it's often not really about the present. It's often about the meaning we give to weight gain, and often as well it's associated with a time in the past. So what I wanted to do to highlight some of the things that can be critical experiences that influence the development of our body image. I want to talk about a study that was done 20 years ago now actually by Orison, Wine and Tang that demonstrated certain critical experiences that are very influential in the development of our body image. Now, I think if this study was repeated today, there would be some other aspects that would be included. However, I still believe this is still one of the most relevant studies that has been done. It really pulls together a lot of great information and it really highlights some of the things that we can help us really understand how someone develops a negative body image. And it's often multiple things. Now, in the study as well, it says that the more critical experiences that you have, and I'm going to talk about these critical experiences, the more critical experiences you have, the more likely you are likely to have a negative body image. Okay, so I'm going to talk about some of the things. Okay, so first of all, self-esteem. So if you have a robust, fairly healthy self-esteem, this is one of the best preventative things against having a negative body image. Okay, so if you genuinely think, I'm okay, I'm accepted, I'm lovable as I am, I have supportive relationships, people who like me, I'm okay, the world is safe, you are going to feel so much better about your body. So it's so interesting, isn't it? Because actually when we're sort of saying this out loud, you kind of realize that actually kind of negative body image is often not really much to do with the body. It's more about how we feel about ourselves deep down and then what gets projected on the body. So if you don't have a healthy self-esteem in the culture that we live in, you are hugely vulnerable to using weight loss, changing your body, trying to manipulate your body in some way to gain validation, to gain acceptance is very understandable. You know, the culture we live in is very toxic. Whereas if you have a more healthy self-esteem where you feel okay as you are, you're far less likely to buy into all of these external things. You're far less likely to be sucked in a way by being validated by others for how you look. You're just much more rooted and grounded in yourself. So really, this is just so good, I think, just to recognize like self-worth is such an important experience, really. If you have good self-worth, then you are on a better platform for life. And I think anyone that's listening that has children, you know, just to really kind of understand this as well, the more that you can really just support and validate and love and encourage your children is going to be so helpful in you know, as another buffer against the world, against having negative body image. It's not the one thing that's going to cure everything, but it's going to help. Okay, next thing, social comparison. So if you had a lot of social comparison early on in your life with other bodies, you are probably going to have a more negative body image. So this can happen sometimes if you have siblings who are in different size bodies to you. You may compare yourself. Maybe if you had a parent who was very concerned about being smaller, and in a way perhaps, you know, there was a competitive element, or a parent who really gave you a lot of feedback, so you became very aware of how your body looked. Comparisons as well can happen between friends. I think in like all girls schools, these are really high risk situations for a lot of comparison. Of course, we've got social media these days, and also in certain professions, comparison is quite challenging as well. So if you're in acting, TV, dance, or anything, you know, anything performance related. Also, if you're a jockey, that's another kind of area where there could be a lot of comparison. So again, it's going to be very individual to you, but think about kind of your early life, different circumstances you've been exposed to over the years, and notice like where were your kind of earliest comparisons. Okay, the next thing, family values and attitudes. So, I mean, this makes sense, doesn't it? Because as children, we grow up in families, we are like little sponges. We absorb everything that goes on around us, and this becomes our normal. So if you have a parent who is constantly talking about weight, you're going to take that on board and probably start to feel concerned about your own weight. You know, if you have a parent who's very dissatisfied with their body and is constantly criticizing themselves or criticizing others, again, you're going to pick that up. So, you know, I think we look to our parents, don't we, as kind of all-knowing, all-wise. Of course, we usually love our parents, they're on the pedestal. So if your parent says anything about your body, of course, you're going to really absorb that, and it's going to have such a big impact. So family values and attitudes are really important. But I think the thing to say here as well is if you're listening as a parent and you're just really worried about your own body image and food stuff and passing this on to your children, I think just having awareness is really important, and have compassion for yourself. You know, I think we've often been raised by parents who had no understanding of all these issues. So we've been indoctrinated with diet culture from birth, and we haven't really ever had much opportunity to question things, to look at things differently. But the great thing is these days, even if you've got your ongoing struggles with food and body image and you have children, the fact that you are aware of this, you can protect your children, you can be much more conscious in your parenting. Okay, the next one, peer or family competition. So if you experience pressure to look a certain way, now in certain families, it can be really important maybe to, I don't know, be slim or to look perfect, or, you know, it can show up in many different ways. I'm thinking of a client I worked with, probably over 5 years ago now, who was blonde, blue-eyed, and had long, sort of, you know, beautiful curly hair, but she lived in a family where everyone was brown eyes, dark hair, and was sort of slim, boyish build. And she always compared herself to what the kind of family norm was and felt that she was somehow lacking. So that's just a really interesting thing. So just sort of noticing as well. And I think in things like gymnastics or dance, there can be quite a lot of competition, can't there? So it's just really noticing where you might have experienced those pressures. The next critical experience is eating disorder experience. So if you know someone well when you're growing up, in your teens, who had an eating disorder, that can be a critical experience because you've kind of been exposed to someone who's struggling with food, and we're so influenced by the people that we spend time with. Or maybe you've had your own problems with overeating, being out of control around food. Now, for many people, they may emotionally eat, use food for comfort, perhaps we know well before they develop an eating disorder or have body image struggles. So eating disorder experience can be quite a common one. Okay, the next critical experience in the development of body image is puberty. So puberty, I think, is an incredibly challenging time for many of us. Our bodies change, we feel embarrassed, insecure. We so want to fit in and be liked. It can be quite excruciating. Particularly though, if you develop earlier than your peers and perhaps you get attention from others, or you just feel, oh my God, I'm really different from everyone, that can be really, really challenging. And I can think of several people I've worked with anorexia nervosa who sort of started their periods maybe at the latter end of primary school, and that was quite triggering. And I think particularly back in the day where there's not much understanding or support, and they had to sort of navigate through that on their own. Another thing as well is getting unwanted attention from others, perhaps being objectified, sort of developing breasts. Another one as well is experiencing a big change in weight or height at puberty. I know some of my clients as well who have been incredibly tall, maybe about the age of 12, and have felt bigger than everyone else. And that has really fed into negative body image. Okay, the next one, sexual attention. So if you've had unwanted sexual attention, if you've been really sort of objectified, people sort of checking you out, giving you attention, perhaps before you really understand what it's about. And when that just feels really, really uncomfortable. And then you can start to feel really ashamed, embarrassed, just self-conscious in your body. Okay, the next one's physical activity. Now, this is an interesting one because I think we often think, doing sports, physical activity, that's really positive for body image. And I think to some extent that is true. But if you play competitive sports, you can feel more under pressure, particularly if you're doing things like gymnastics or dance, or where there's an aesthetic kind of or weight-based thing involved. Swimming as well, when you're constantly kind of, in a costume, you can feel quite self-conscious, more room for comparison. And also I think particularly back in the day, sometimes unhelpful comments from coaches and things like that, perhaps not really realising how detrimental that can be for body image. Also as well, perhaps experiencing an embarrassing moment in sports, PE, at school. I think as well, for many people haven't really enjoyed doing physical activity at school. If you were good at sport, then you're really sort of celebrated and put in teams and chosen. But if you weren't so good, you could often feel kind of really uncomfortable, really embarrassed. And, PE was not a good place to feel good in your body image. The next one is acceptance and rejection. So if you've been asked out on dates, given a lot of attention because of your appearance, or even if you've been rejected because of your appearance. Now, one thing I find with so many of my clients is anyone that has had a lot of feedback about their looks, and this can be positive or negative feedback, it really does not help with body image. Now, people would sometimes think, it's much more understandable to assume that if someone is receiving critical feedback about their body, that's going to have a really negative impact. That makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? But I find as well with some of my clients who are objectively very beautiful, sometimes I work with actresses or models, and people comment on their looks all the time, and this becomes very confusing, very sort of discombobulating for the psyche, because everyone is always commenting on how you look, giving you feedback, and you become very dependent on that external validation, but also very confused because of you're getting everyone's subjective feedback all the time, and it's really hard to get a true sense of yourself and your body. So that's a really interesting one. Changes in weight and body size, that's another critical experience. So if you were in a larger body when you were younger, even if you were skinny when you were younger, I think if we identify with being at a certain sort of body weight in a certain body size, this can really impact our body image. I have clients I've worked with who were perhaps very, very slim before puberty, and then they really struggled when they went through puberty because they came into a more normal sized body, and then they kind of lost that identity of being the small, skinny person. And in our society, if you're small and slim, people tend to want to take care of you, look after you. It's sort of seen as a kind of good thing. And if your identity's got very caught up in that, that can become a real critical experience. And if you lose and gain weight a lot, really not great for body image. Anyone that's yo-yo dieted a lot is probably going to experience poor body image. Clothing, so this is an interesting one. So If you think fashionable clothing doesn't look good on you, maybe you didn't feel that you fitted in with your peer group, you weren't allowed the same clothes as your friend, or maybe kind of there were financial barriers there, or maybe you thought you wore hand-me-downs as a child, you never felt you had your own clothes, or maybe you had lovely clothes growing up where you felt that clothes was really, really important, became so much about your kind of self-esteem and identity and validation. So you become very self-conscious and aware of your clothes, and it all feeds into negative body image. So again, really interesting one. Next one's verbal feedback. So if you're having positive comments or negative comments about others, I think we've kind of covered that in ones before, but that is its own critical experience. Another one as well, parents' physical shape. So, if your parents are very underweight, very overweight, this can have a real impact on your body image as well and how you see your body. And I think probably what's more important here is it's not so much about the weight, the size itself, it's more how your parents perceive themselves, how they talk about their bodies, how they feel in their bodies is the crucial bit. Dieting as well is a critical experience. If you are on and off diets, it's not good for body image. If you're teased, I think bullying is one of the most pervasive, horrible things for anyone to go through. I think of several clients I've worked with who've experienced relentless bullying at different times in their lives, and it's had such a long-term impact on their kind of likability, their feelings of self-worth, and absolutely on their body image. The next one is physical conditions. So this is perhaps a more obvious one when we talk about it. If you have an accident that changes your physical appearance, or if you have a major operation, that is going to be very, very impactful for your body image. And that kind of makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? I think we could understand that. The next one is abuse or assault. So if you experience sexual, physical, emotional abuse, you're very likely to have a very poor body image. Now, in the study, it says that this is not as important as it was once thought. Because I think back in the day, it was almost assumed that if you had poor body image, it's probably always linked to abuse or assault. Now, I think it's not to minimize anyone's experience here, because I think anyone that has been through any kind of abuse, is going to have really negative body image. It's going to really impact your self-worth, carrying that trauma, impact you on many, many levels. But I guess what we're just trying to say here is that actually poor body image is more than abuse and assault. It's a very significant critical experience. But actually, there are multiple things, as we're talking about, that are relevant. Okay, and the last one is architecture. Interesting one as well. Like if you don't fit into seats on planes, this can be a really difficult one if you're kind of going into a cafe and you wonder, can the chair hold my weight? Things like that. That's something, again, that can be really negative for body image. And I think of the client we worked with many years ago now who, before they went to a meeting or anything, they're in a larger body, before they went to a meeting, before they, were kind of meeting up with people, they would always feel they had to get there early to navigate the kind of seating arrangements, make sure there was a chair they could sit on that they felt could carry their weight, etc. And it was a real eye-opener for me, because it really highlighted to me just that level of distress and unease that person had to live with every single day. And I think we do live in such a fat-phobic society, and people are just really, really unkind to people in larger bodies. And I think it's just something that is, really, really hard to appreciate unless you've lived in a larger body. And I just want to kind of really validate that if you are kind of in a larger body and you are dealing with those things every day, I just really want to acknowledge that, because I think the world is not compassionate and not supportive of these things. Anyway, so that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour through the critical experiences in the development of body image. I hope you found it helpful. And if you're not following me already on Instagram, do seek me out, the Eating Disorder Therapist _. And for further support with your relationship with food, do go to the eatingdisordertherapist.co.uk. And if you enjoy this podcast, I would be so grateful if you would follow, rate and review, as it helps it reach so many more listeners. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to sharing another podcast episode with you very soon.